Welcome back, guys, to the Andrei Delic Podcast. Today is a reality check. I'm going to be alone. So I want to address something that just with my friends, through social media, while talking with my friends, talking with people I know, I feel like there's this little trend that's happening amongst young people, and surprisingly so only in the West, where I see young people, especially young university students, and I'm talking about also regarding my colleagues when I used to attend university at U Ottawa, I used to see this trend where socialism, where communism was really popular and really attractive to these young students. Now, of course, you guys probably know me. For people who watch my podcast long form and who are, how can I say this, maybe loyal fans to me, and to you guys, I fucking love you guys. I appreciate it. But you guys probably know that I'm more capitalistic. I am more American type of mentality when it comes to economy, society, culture, and everything. So, of course, whilst being with my friends or with my university colleagues or at work or with social media, I see, of course, these trends amongst young people, not all young people, but some young people who find communism and socialism really attractive and who like the ideology and who like the mentality and the way of life and just the system that it brings into place. My parents were born and raised in ex-Yugoslavia, and whilst it was Yugoslavia before the war broke out in 1992, it was a socialist country. They had a dictator. It came with everything else, right? You cannot have opposition parties. You cannot talk against the authorities, which at the time was Josip Broz Tito was a dictator of Yugoslavia, him and then his regime. You weren't allowed to talk against them. You weren't allowed to form a opposition party against them. But at the same time, it wasn't as crazy as, let's say, USSR and during the Cold War, where it was like full communism. They were hidden from the world, from the Western world, and they were just focused on being purely communist. Yugoslavia was a bit different. Since Yugoslavia was in the middle of the West and the East Europe, it is considered Eastern Europe, but in a way, if you look at it geographically, I'm going to pull up a map. If you look at it geographically, it's kind of like in the middle of East and West. And if you think about it, also for people who don't know, during the Cold War, Yugoslavia was the only country in Europe who didn't have a side. They didn't pick a side. Yugoslavia didn't pick a side. It wasn't with the East and it wasn't with the West. It was just simply independent. Since it was prime location, a smart thing that Josip Broz Tito did, I gotta hand it out to him, really, really smart move on his part. He went to go see the West. He said, give me money and I won't join the East. And then he went to go see the East. He said, give me money and I won't join the West. Because since geographically speaking, he was on prime position for both West and East, he decided to stay neutral, independent, and then he got money from both sides and then he gave it back to his population. From what I hear from my family members, my cousins, my father, my mom, Josip Broz Tito was a really chill dictator. He was just a chill guy, if I can say it like that. He was a chill dictator. He wasn't a crazy dictator like Joseph Stalin or like Kim Jong-un or Kim Jong-il, whatever his name is, Xi Jinping in China. He wasn't crazy like those dictators. He was really chill, meaning that, yes, there were some things which you weren't allowed to do. You weren't allowed to talk against Tito. And even for people who talked against him, Tito firsthand would try to calm them down and tell them, you know what, stop talking against me. I'm going to have to throw you in jail. Like, he was really chill. But then if they persisted through the nature of it being a socialist country, on paper, by law, he had to throw them in jail. So he would throw them in jail. But in general, some things that were different in ex-Yugoslavia, considering compared to, let's say, USSR, is that if you wanted to have more money, in a way you could have. Now you couldn't end up being a billionaire, but you could have created some. You were allowed to own private businesses. Some people during ex-Yugoslavia owned hotels. Other people who owned restaurants. Other people owned clothing lines, clothing stores, coffee shops, whatever small businesses you're allowed to own. People owned them in ex-Yugoslavia. In the USSR, you weren't allowed to own anything because it was purely communist. So the state owns everything. And you work, you're a worker, you get paid a certain amount, and you give out the most you can, and you only take what you need. So if you have 5 kids, even if you work less than the guy who has no kids, you can still take more because you have 5 kids, so you need more. Which is really humane, but still, I'm not for it. Considering put all together, it's not the best way for human society and for humans, considering how we humans are and how life and how society is. But to get back to ex-Yugoslavia, from what I heard, of course, I was born here in Canada in the year 2000, and I was raised here. So I wasn't raised there, but from what I hear from my parents, my family members, cousins, grandparents, uncles, aunts, and everything, this is what it looked like. So for people who had ambition in ex-Yugoslavia during the Socialist Party years in Yugoslavia, they were allowed to chase their dreams, chase their ambitions by becoming business owners, by becoming athletes, by becoming musicians, by becoming actors, by chasing their dreams. They were allowed to do it. So in a way, ex-Yugoslavia socialism didn't fully kill human ambition. It didn't. They allowed it to exist through entrepreneurship and artists and athletes. But they weren't allowed to abuse other people systematically and economically in order for them to gain more money. That wasn't allowed, which in a way isn't that bad, right? So you're allowed to make more money than someone who was less worker and less ambitious, which is actually good. But you weren't allowed to make, let's say, 50 times more than your workers. You're allowed to make 3-4 times more than your workers, which in a way your workers can still make money, enjoy life, and have a peaceful and joyful life. And at the same time, since you're more ambitious, you're more hard worker, you're allowed to make more money than these other people, which would then translate to you having more, let's say, materialistic goods than this other person since you worked harder and you had more ambition. But yes, altogether, it does remain a socialist country. And some other things that I heard that were really good during ex-Yugoslavia from my parents is that crime was at an all-time low. And this goes for all socialist and all communist countries even today. The reason why is if the state wants to put you in jail, they put you in jail. There's no trial. There's no innocent until proven guilty. There's none of that bullshit. If you're a criminal, we all know you're a criminal. We take your ass and we throw you in jail. It's as simple as that. Since everyone is aware that that is a system, that demotivates people to do criminal activities. Of course, as long as there are human beings, as long as there is a society, there will be people who will break the rules, who will break laws, and who will bend the laws in order for them to gain something. But at the end of the day, there was way less criminal activity because let's say in America, right, when there was the Italian mafia, everyone knew that John Gotti was a criminal. When you would see John Gotti walk the streets of New York, you're a random citizen. When you would see him walk the streets of New York, you know that that guy is probably a mass murderer. He probably racketeers a lot of businesses. He probably sells crack, maybe not him personally, but you know what I mean. And he's a fucking mafia member, and he's a criminal, and he does criminal activity. Maybe you can't prove it, but we all know he's a fucking criminal. Now, of course, being in a democratic country, in a capitalist country like America, where you are innocent until proven guilty, and where if you want to get thrown in jail, the state has to show enough proof for you to end up being in jail. And then it's not only as simple as that. You have to go in front of a judge, in front of a jury of your peers, of 12 of your peers, and they have to deem that you are guilty. Even if they know that you are guilty, you can only base your response on the proofs and the results that are shown to you in court. That is how it works. But we all know John Gotti was a fucking criminal. In a communist country, in a socialist country, a John Gotti cannot exist. Why? Because since everyone knows that he's a criminal, the state would simply take John Gotti, put him in front of a judge. There would be like a trial. It's like a really staged and fake trial where they would like just for show, but they would throw his ass in jail. They don't need proof. They don't need none of that shit. The state knows you're a criminal. They don't have the necessary, and you know also how in capitalist countries, how in like democratic countries, you have to like show proof. You have to like also legally attain that proof. You cannot just like, if you gain proof, if you gain evidence by breaking the law, then that evidence isn't admissible in a courtroom. It's not admissible because you broke the law to gain the evidence. Even if the evidence literally shows that he's a criminal, you still broke the law in order to get that evidence. So that means that evidence isn't admissible in court. If you think about it, it's a little bit fucking dumb. It's a little bit stupid. Of course, we have to play by the rules. At the end of the day, no one is above the law. I understand that and I agree with it. But I take a video of someone fucking killing someone, since that video was, I'm doing hyperbole, since that video was illegally recorded, it's not admissible in court. But in the video, you can literally see the guy killing another guy. I mean, yes, maybe I fucking took it illegally. Yes, I understand. But he still fucking murdered a guy. It's still fucking murder. Like, we fucking see it. You know what I mean? Like, yes, I understand. So, like, it's a really sensitive subject, I guess. Like, a really debatable subject. And it is also to this day. But in a socialist country like ex-Yugoslavia or in a communist country, there's none of that bullshit. We know he's a criminal. We know he's a mass murderer. We know he's a racketeer. We know he sells drugs. We know he fucking does criminal activities. We take his ass, we throw him in jail. It's as simple as that. We don't break our minds. We don't bust our balls talking about going back and forth with lawyers, with the jury, with the judge, with evidence. And then the judge said, oh, but the evidence wasn't attained legally, blah, blah, blah. Then this paper, sign this paper, read this. And then let's push back the trial date for another 3-4 years. There's none of that bullshit. And that's something that maybe is actually better. Now, maybe it is actually better because at the end of the day, if you do criminal activities, you have to be thrown in jail. Maybe it's simpler to see who's a criminal if that criminal is known, a really, really big criminal, right? Like John Gotti. But so that would work perfectly for these big criminals who everyone knows that they are big criminals. But maybe for, like, you know, civil cases between family members, between non-criminals who did something criminal activities, but they're not full-time criminals. Maybe that's where it gets a bit more touchy because then you actually need to go in front of a judge, debate, show your evidence, and then this, and blah, blah, blah. Then that's maybe a bit different. But in a socialist country, in a communist country, there's no corruption and there's no possibility of someone becoming a high-profile criminal, of someone becoming a big and famous and rich mafia member. Because since you cannot be innocent until proven guilty and you don't have to face a trial in order for you to go or to not go in jail, that's why it cannot happen. So that is a good thing that socialism and communism offers, is that no one can become a big criminal, a big and powerful and rich and famous criminal. It cannot happen, since how the system is made is you start becoming bigger and bigger. Everyone around you knows you're a criminal. All the cops know you're a criminal. We don't have proof. We don't give a fuck. The state knows you're a criminal. We're gonna take your ass, throw you in jail. It's as simple as that. We'll never hear from you again. Society in communist and socialist countries, they'll hear about it. They'll know about it. And 99% of those people who wanted to become mafia members, big time criminals who have money, power, and fame, they're going to maybe rethink their situation and say, you know what? It's maybe not possible in a country like ex-Yugoslavia. And it wasn't possible. Growing up, my dad told me, he explained to me how no one was allowed to be a criminal because if they knew that you did criminal activities, the state would simply take your ass and throw you in jail without any proof, without any evidence, without any blah, blah, yada, yada, yada. They know you're a criminal. They throw your ass in jail. It's as simple as that. And also, he also explained to me how cops in ex-Yugoslavia had way more authority and were way more respected and feared than cops in democratic countries. He explained to me how one cop in a socialist country like ex-Yugoslavia, if one cop would come amongst 10 citizens who are like big and strong and they're known to be intimidating and they're known to be like, you know, the bosses of that part of the city, one cop could pull up and no one was allowed to touch him. No one dared to touch him because they knew that if they touch that cop, if they hit him, if they push him around, if they rob from him, if they kill him, whatever, they know that the state is going to find their asses, grab all of them and beat them to death or beat them so badly that they're going to end up in a hospital. And even worse, after they're done being in the hospital, they're going to jail. So they know that if they touch that cop, if they mess with that cop, even though they're like the biggest, how can I say this? It wasn't mafia members, they weren't gang members, but they were like the strongest people in that part of the city, in that city of Sarajevo, which was part of ex-Yugoslavia. How it worked is, at that time, since no one was allowed to be a criminal, maybe petty thefts, petty crime here and there, and then until they get caught, but no one was technically allowed to be a criminal. So how it worked whilst my dad was growing up is men amongst each other, they would prove to other men who is the strongest physically through fist fights, through fighting. That's how they did it. You wanted to be the main guy. You wanted to be the top G of Sarajevo, of that city, the capital of Bosnia. If you wanted to be the main guy in that city, if you wanted to be the main guy for a part of that city, the way you did it, since it was a socialist country, you weren't allowed to have guns. You weren't allowed to have knives. You weren't allowed to kill someone, because you know that if you kill someone, unlike a criminal, let's say Whitey Bulger, he killed many people in America whilst he was still walking the streets freely, because the state didn't have any evidence or any proof to put him in jail. But in ex-Yugoslavia, since if someone was to kill someone to show authority or to show power, the state would simply take his ass and throw him in jail. So people wouldn't do it. They wouldn't kill, they wouldn't have guns, they wouldn't stab, none of that shit. They wouldn't sell drugs so he can have more money and become a more powerful criminal and have more influence and power over another criminal because he sells more drugs, so he makes more money, whatever. None of that existed since it was a socialist country. You couldn't do criminal activities because if you were to do criminal activities, like I've been saying since the beginning, your ass is thrown in jail immediately, no trial, no evidence, no whatever. So amongst them, what they did was fist fights. You want to be the main guy of this part of the city? You think you're better than me? You think you have more balls than me? You think you're a bigger top G than me? You think you're a bigger dog than me? Let's fight. Literally, let's physically fight. And the guy who won, he was a top G. And it was no one around the city who, for this part of the city, he's the strongest guy. For this part of the city, he's the strongest. For this part of the city, he's the strongest. So in a way, you're the main guy. But even those guys who are considered as the strongest men who are part of that city, the strongest guys who are part of that city, when a state cop pulls up, they all shut the fuck up. No one dares talk back to the cop. No one dares even slightly touch the cop. No one dares to even hit the cop. No one dares to not even touch the cop, because they know that even if they touch the cop, they know what's going to happen to them. 10 cops are going to pull up representing the state. They're going to take your ass. They're going to throw you in jail, and they're going to beat you with their fucking, the batons that cops have. They're going to beat you, and they're going to destroy every fucking living organ you have inside of yourself. And my dad told me this because he saw it with his eyes. The guys who were the biggest top Gs from that part of the city, whenever a cop would pull up, he would see the fear in their eyes, and he would see the cop pulling up. He could be small, like 5'5", 120 pounds. But since he was a cop, and since by you being a cop in a socialist country like Yugoslavia, you represent the country. And by you representing the country, you represent also Josip Broz Tito, the dictator, and you represent the socialist communist party. So if someone was to touch you, that would be considered an attack to the state, not an attack to that person, to that cop as a person. But since someone touches that cop, since someone attacks the cop, that attack would be considered as an attack to the state because the cop represents the state. And in a socialist country, in a communist country, an attack towards the state is the worst fucking thing you can do. That's why there's no opposition party, because a opposition party also means an attack to the state. And that's why you're not allowed to talk against the state, against a political party, or against a dictator, because talking against them also means an attack to the state. So that's why those top Gs, those big, how can I say this, those biggest dogs in those part of the cities, they wouldn't dare touch a cop because that would represent an attack to the state. An attack to the state means 10 cops pull up, they grab your ass, no evidence, no trial, no nothing. No one's going to ask any questions. They're going to take your ass. put you in a fucking shed, and they're going to beat you to fucking death. And if they don't beat you to death, what's going to happen is they're going to beat you so fucking badly, you might never walk again. You'll probably end up in a fucking hospital. And if you survive that beating, you'll end up in a hospital. And then after you're fully rehabilitated, how can I say it? After you're fully recovered, you're not going back to the streets to live a free and happy life. After you're fully recovered from that almost deadly beating, they're going to take your ass and throw you in jail for a couple of years just so you can think of your past actions. So that's why in communist and socialist countries, criminal activities are at an all-time low. They still exist, of course, but they are at an all-time low. So there are some pros to socialism and communism. Also, one thing that I heard my dad and my parents and my relatives say is that during ex-Yugoslavia, one thing that they were really, really good upon and really, really good was physical activity, nutrition, and health. Way, way better than in capitalist countries. If you look at facts and stats, during that time, in that socialist country, there was way less obese people than people in capitalist country. Because in those countries, at school, physical fitness was really fucking important. Everyone had to play a sport. Everyone was obligated to play a sport. And everyone was obligated to be in a certain level of shape. My parents, my family members always talk to me how in school, in gym school, first of all, they had one gym class every day. Here in capitalist Western countries, democratic countries, we have one gym class a week. And that is a fact. We have one gym class a week. And if we're being honest, that's not enough. That's not enough. Of course, here in Quebec, we have French school, French classes, mathematics classes, science classes, history classes, geography classes, all of this shit. It's all really important. But let's not lie and let's not act like physical health and being physically healthy isn't as important, not less important, not more important, maybe even slightly more important than geography class, history class, French class, English class, languages classes, mathematics classes. They're all really important. But in my opinion, physical fitness is number one, because if you don't have health, you don't have anything else. And a healthy body equals a healthy mind. In order for someone to be able to learn all of these important subjects, they need to first of all have a healthy mind. And the only way you can have a healthy mind is by having a fit and healthy body. It's a fucking fact. It goes together. To have a healthy mind, you have to have a healthy body. So in socialist and communist countries, one thing that they were really, really good at, and which they were really, really on top of their game, was physical fitness for young people and then for older people. Because what you develop, what you put into their system when they're young, they're going to grow up and they're going to keep those good habits when they're older, right? It's a fact. So my dad used to tell me when they were young, their physical gym teacher, he would put requirements for all students. You have to be able to do, let's say, 20 push-ups, 5 pull-ups, whatever the number is. They all had physical requirements. And if you didn't meet those physical requirements as a kid, as a teenager, or as a young adult, the teacher would not say, "Oh, it's okay. Here's the participation medal. You did your best. You go, girl. Don't give up." No, he would kick your ass, man. Not physically, but he would be on your ass and he would force you. He would force you to finish your push-ups. He would force you to get in shape. He would force you to be healthier, to run more, to eat healthier. He would force you to be in a better physical shape. Now, of course, I understand how some people can see that, oh my God, it's not humane to force kids to be in shape. It's not humane to force teenagers to be in shape or young adults. They have their own free will. If they want to be fat, they're allowed to be fat. If they want to be out of shape, they're allowed to be out of shape. If they want to be physically unfit, they're allowed to be physically unfit. I understand that, and I agree. As much as I am against it, I agree that everyone should have the free will to do whatever they want with their life. But if we're being honest, everyone, all human beings benefit from a healthy body. Everyone. No one does not benefit from a healthy body. everyone benefits from a healthy body. So having professors, having gym teachers, forcing young kids, forcing young adults, forcing teenagers to be physically healthy, I understand maybe it goes against free will, but at the end of the day, it's for the well-being and it's for the goodness of that person. Like I said, all human beings, 100% of all human beings on planet Earth benefit from a healthy body. All human beings. So it's not that fucked up that in socialist countries where free will is a bit maybe less open than in Western countries, but it's still good. It's good for you, for someone to push you to be physically healthy. It's good for someone to push you to be able to reach certain physical requirements based on your height, based on your gender and everything, and your age and everything else that goes together, right? That's fucking normal. And that is something that we should bring back. That is something that actually America had before, but now with wokeness, now with people being way more softer than what they were before, with people being way more mentally weaker than what they were before, we cannot have that, right? Because if we were to have that today in 2026, it would be a fucking outrage. CNN would say that, oh my God, we're such fascists. These left woke liberals would say that that ideology is a fucking fascist ideology, forcing young people, forcing young adults, forcing young kids and young adolescents to be physically healthy whilst being in school, to force them to implement a healthy lifestyle. Left woke liberals or liptards would see that as far-right fascism. I see that as something that should be normalized in every single society and every single country, implementing a mentality of being physically healthy once they're kids, and then when they grow up to be adolescents and young adults and then adults and even older adults and even elderly people, they keep those routines and they keep that way of life to be physically healthy. That is something that I feel like we should push our society, because a fit society, a healthy society, healthy people create a healthy society, and the healthy society just keeps moving forward and forward. That is one thing that also I really like about, let's say, socialist and communist countries, is that when it comes to physical health, they're on top of their game. They're truly, truly on top of their game. My parents also used to tell me, all my relative members, how before every single kid had to play a sport. You weren't allowed to not play a sport in school. You cannot say, you know what, I'm 10 years old. I don't want to play soccer. I don't want to play basketball. I don't want to play volleyball. I just want to go at home and play video games. You weren't allowed. Not that it was frowned upon by society. You legit weren't allowed to not play a sport. And that is why, if I'm being honest, ex-Yugoslavia, if you look at sports from ex-Yugoslavia, that's why they're really good at sports, because that culture and that way of life, even if today they're still not, they're not a socialist country and it's not Yugoslavia anymore. Now it's Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia, Montenegro, Slovenia and Macedonia, and even Kosovo. Now, since they're all different countries, they still have that mentality, because it wasn't so long ago that it was a socialist country which had and adopted that mentality. So even today, they still have that mentality. And that is why ex-Yugoslavia, if you look at it, if you think about it, ex-Yugoslavia, a small country now of 7 countries, which probably has a total population of 20 million people. If ex-Yugoslavia was to get back together, they would have like a population of 20 million people at the most, right? And they excel in every single sport. Think about it. In soccer, they're phenomenal. In basketball, after Americans, ex-Yugoslavians are the best. In volleyball, they're phenomenal. In water polo, they're phenomenal. In tennis, they're phenomenal. In handball, they're phenomenal. They're phenomenal in so many sports. And one of the main reasons why is because they have the mentality of every single kid, when they're young, they have to play a sport. They need to play a sport. Not they have the luxury to play a sport, but it's a must. Just as much as brushing your teeth every day is a must, to most people, it's a must to brush them twice a day. And ex-Yugoslavia, even now in 2026, Serbia, Croatia, even though it's not Yugoslavia anymore, they still have the culture and the mentality of everyone has to to play a sport, every little kid has to play a sport. That's why even though they have such a small population, that's why they have so many professional athletes, and that is why they have so many good athletes across almost all sports. That is the main reason why. And then of course, most of them are tall, and then maybe a lot of them are physically gifted. Maybe that also plays a part, but it's mostly the culture. Croatia, right, is a country of 2.5 million people. In 2022, they finished third in the World Cup. In 2018, they finished second. And in 1998, they finished third. A country of 3 million people at the most for a sport that is so global and they're so dominant. And the only reason why is because the sport culture over there is fucking dominant. Basketball. After America, the greatest country in basketball is ex-Yugoslavia. They're the greatest in basketball. If you think about it, Doncic, Jokic, they're fucking dominating the league for the past 5 years, and they come from such a small country and a small culture. But despite it being a small country and a small culture, it's a powerful sport-driven culture. Djokovic is, by numbers and by stats, the greatest tennis player of all time, and he's Serbian. Water polo, I don't even have to say it, by far, ex-Yugoslavians are the best. And volleyball, they're phenomenal. And handball, they're also the greatest of all time. And that is why, is because their mentality, they adopted it, they had it for quite some time, and they still have it today. When I went to visit Yugoslavia, everyone, I never saw this in my life here in Canada. In the summer, from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., no one is outside because it's fucking hot outside. No one is outside. They're walking, going to coffee shops, having fun, working, whatever. From 6 p.m. to 11 p.m., everyone is outside playing sports, either soccer, basketball, tennis, volleyball, water polo, handball. Everyone is outside playing sports from 6 p.m. to 11 p.m. I never saw that in my life. It's crazy how the culture over there is sports driven. And it all stems from a socialist background and a socialist past. So that is one thing that I really, really love and appreciate from a socialist country. And then also, if I might add, one thing also that he did really well, although this is to a certain degree, which is something that my relatives tell me, is that education over there was way more powerful at the time where it was socialist, at the time where it was Yugoslavia. You had to learn way more, and they were way more knowledgeable regarding certain topics than, let's say, we kids nowadays in North America, in the Western world. So like I said, and I only spoke from experience, from what I heard from my family members and from what I read and everything. There are some good things. It's not all bad from socialism and communism. There are some good things. But in general, to all these students and to all my friends and to all my relatives who prefer socialism and communism over capitalism and democracy, that's fucking dumb. Because although there are a lot of pros to having a communist and socialist countries, at the end, humans being humans, there's way more cons than pros. And that is why, on paper, the way Karl Marx wrote his Communist Manifesto, A Utopian Society, on paper, it makes a lot of sense because on paper, they do not put human ego on paper. So on paper, it makes a lot of sense. In practice, it doesn't fucking work. We saw it many years, many societies, many decades, many centuries. We saw that when humans don't have liberty, don't have freedom, don't have democracy, it doesn't fucking work. And plus with the human ego, since all human beings have an ego, some more than others, since we're all ambitious, since all human beings want to strive to become the best versions of themselves, or at least try during their lifetime to become the best versions of themselves, since all human beings want to accomplish all of their wildest dreams, it doesn't mean that all of them will. Most of them will never accomplish their wildest dreams. But every single human being has that inside of them to want to accomplish all of their wildest dreams. Since we're all like that, that's why in practice, capitalism is the best economic system in the world. It's the best system in the world by far. There are some cons, but there are way more pros than cons. The pros outweigh the cons. And in practice, capitalism is way, way better because human beings have the ego that we have. Like I said, on paper. So Karl Marx's Communism/Socialism explained. Socialism/communism, in my opinion, no, wait, where were I? Yeah, okay, so let me explain the way Karl Marx wrote his Communist Manifesto. So Karl Marx was a 19th century philosopher and economist who argued that society is shaped mainly by class struggle, especially the conflict between the wealthy owners of businesses and factories, the bourgeoisie, and the working class, the proletariat. His ideas became the foundations of modern communism, the basic idea of Marxism. Marx believed capitalism creates wealth, innovation, and industry, but also creates inequality because workers do the labor, owners keep most of the profits. Over time, wealth becomes concentrated among fewer people. That is true. But one thing that he also highlighted was that capitalism creates innovation. That is what's fucking important. Like I said, with capitalism, that is why we have innovation. Because when you allow human beings to express themselves, when you allow human beings to chase all of their wildest dreams, when you allow human beings to accomplish everything you want to accomplish, by nature, humans become the best versions of themselves. And by creating all these fucked up things, they make society better. Elon Musk, by default, he wanted to accomplish everything he wanted to accomplish because he had this sense of, I want to accomplish my dream. I want to become the best version of myself. But by him accomplishing everything that he wanted to accomplish for his own well-being, by consequence, he innovated society and he made our society move forward. That is a fucking fact. So Karl Marx argued that this would eventually lead workers to revolt against the system. Marx's view of history. Marx, through human societies, evolved through stages. First stage is primitive societies. Second is slave societies. Third is feudalism, lords and kings. Fourth is capitalism. Fifth is socialism. And then sixth is communism. That's how he sees it. He believed that capitalism would eventually collapse because of inequality and economic crisis. Socialism versus communism. That's like I said. You go ex-Yugoslavia, it was socialist, but then there are countries which were communist like the USSR. So the difference is socialism, a transitional stage where the government or workers control major industries. Wealth is redistributed more equally. Classes still somewhat exist. And this is what I mean. When my family members lived in ex-Yugoslavia, like I said in the beginning of the episode, there were some classes, meaning that some people had more than some other people because they were allowed to own restaurants, own hotels, and own these small businesses that in communism you aren't allowed. So that would create some sort of differences between classes. Of course, it's not as big as, let's say, in capitalism, someone who owns a fucking multi-billion-dollar company and a fucking dishwasher. It's not that level of difference between classes. But in socialism, there were some different classes. Some had a bit more than others. People who own maybe casinos, people who own restaurants, people who own bars, coffee shops. They could have a bit more than someone who was simply, let's say, a clerk at a grocery store. But at the same time, it wasn't as big of a difference between, like I said, a fucking multi-billion-dollar company, owner of a company, and a fucking dishwasher in America. It's not that big of a difference. But in socialism, the state still exists. In communism, and like I said, for socialism, you aren't allowed to talk against the government. You're not allowed to form a opposition party because that would mean that you're going against the government and you're going against the dictator and the state. And that is something that, as much as it's not allowed in communism, same goes for socialism, ex-Yugoslavia. Communism, the final stage where no social classes exist, no private ownership of major production, wealth resources are shared collectively, the state supposedly becomes unnecessary and fades away. Marx imagined a society where people work according to ability and receive according to need. That's why the famous slogan originated. One of the most famous communist ideas associated with Marx is, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. So meaning you give the most that you can, you give all of your talents, you do the best that you can to make society move forward, but you only take what you need. So let's say I'm 30 years old and I'm highly competent, highly talented, fucking a genius. I give my max to make society the best, but I don't take as much in terms of money, in terms of food, whatever, as someone who maybe isn't as talented as me, isn't as smart as me, isn't as competent as me, doesn't make society move forward as much as I do. But since he has 5 kids and he has more needs than me, he takes more than me because he needs more than I. Even though I, let's say, produce more than he does, and I innovate and I drive society more forward than he does. The Communist Manifesto. In 1848, Marx and Friedrich Engels wrote the Communist Manifesto, which argued that workers around the world should unite against capitalist systems. The manifesto is one of the most influential political texts in history. Again, like I said, in real life, it didn't work because humans are humans. We have our ego and we have our human nature where we don't want to be fucking ruled, where our ambition, we want to strive to become the best versions of ourselves. Like I said, like I explained it, let's say right? If I had literally no ego, zero ego, right? And I was that talented, that competent, that intelligent, that innovative, then I wouldn't mind giving my best and only taking what I need. I wouldn't mind. But since we all have egos, some more than others, logically, someone with an ego is going to say, okay, listen, so I'm highly competent, I'm highly smart, I'm making society move forward, I'm innovating society in all these different terms and every single other sphere that society has. I should have way more than the other guy. I don't give a fuck if he has 5 kids. That's his fucking problem. I'm innovating way more than him. I'm way more competent than him. I'm way more harder working than he is. I should have more than him. That is a human ego, which is normal. We all have the human ego. And that is why, like I said, I don't give a fuck if he has 5 kids. That's his problem. That's his problem. Let him figure it out. Give me what I deserve, what I worked for, what I innovated for, what I became competent for and knowledgeable for. I want to have a Lamborghini. I want to have 3 Lamborghinis. If I'm allowed, I want to have 3 Lamborghinis. I don't give a fuck if he doesn't have a car and if he has 5 kids. Like I said, that's his problem. I'm living life on my terms. I want to accomplish everything that I want to accomplish. I have my ego. I could do everything that I need to do with 1 Lambo. I don't need 3 Lambos. But fuck it. I have a human ego. I want 3 Lambos. It is what it is. That's how we humans are. So like I said, also, if I might add, one thing that I can personally say that I saw from, let's say, going to Cuba a lot. Cuba is communist. One thing that I saw, and I love my Cubans, don't think this wrongly, but y'all are fucking lazy. Y'all are lazy as fuck. Same goes for countries which were once communist or socialist. Same goes for ex-Yugoslavia. Because think about it, right? We are humans and we have human ego. And as human beings, we're always looking to do work as easiest as we can. Meaning, if I know that if I work well or if I work badly, I still get paid the same, well, I'm going to work badly. I'm not going to give a fuck. Why? Because at the end of the day, I cannot grow. I cannot gain more. I cannot gain more money by me showing how competent and how hardworking I am. So fuck it, I'm just going to do the minimal work. And that's why it creates a lazy society. Same goes for fucking Cuba. Whenever you go to Cuba, for everyone who ever went to Cuba and then went to Mexico, you're going to see the difference. You're going to see the fucking difference. Difference of laziness. Mexicans in general are way less lazy and way more hardworking than Cubans. And you cannot blame them. It's because how their society is made. It's only dumb for you to not be lazy in Cuba. Since it's a communist country, if you work hard, let's say there's 2 bus drivers. One works way harder than the other one. The other one does the bare minimum. They both get paid the same. So the guy who's working harder, in a way, he's fucking dumb. This guy is slacking, not giving a fuck, doing the least that he can, and he's getting paid as much as you are. Human ego. Of course, the guy isn't going to say, since the guy has an ego, he only thinks about himself. At the end of the day, we all human beings, as good as we can be, as good as we want to help everyone, at the end of the day, We all care more about ourselves than other people, which is normal. That's how we are built. That's how we are wired to be as human beings. Isn't it normal for you to say, listen, why would I give my best? Why would I work so hard so that other people have a better service? Let's say 2 bus drivers, right? The guy who works harder and gives it his all and gives the best service, the people who ride in his bus, they're going to have a way better ride than the guy who does the bare minimum and doesn't give a fuck, right? It's going to be better for everyone. But the driver, he's not fucking Gandhi. He's not Jesus Christ. He's not Mother Teresa. Why? Logically, he would say to himself, why would I sacrifice myself? Why would I work so hard so that other people can enjoy and I get paid the same? I don't give a fuck about other people. I'm going to do the bare minimum and I'm going to get paid the same. That's what happens. That's also what happened in ex-Yugoslavia once it became ex-Yugoslavia, meaning Serbia, Croatia. Once they all separated and they all became capitalistic and democratic, there's many lazy people over there because of socialism and of communism before. So that's one thing that happens. Of course, not everyone is. There's a lot of people who live currently in Serbia and Croatia who are really competent, really hard worker and make millions and millions and millions of dollars. But also, if I'm speaking for ex-Yugoslavia, if you take Serbia and if you take Yugoslavia, Yugoslavia was way more thriving and they were way more developed as a country than Serbia. My Serbians, my Croatians, my Bosnians, whatever, if you're watching this, we all know that everyone down there is a fucking crook. The people over there who have the most money and the most power are the people who are the biggest crooks. They're all the biggest crooks. The politicians over there are the biggest crooks. Every single businessman who has millions of dollars in ex-Yugoslavia, they're all the biggest crooks. All the mafia members, which didn't exist in ex-Yugoslavia because, like I explained, how the system was, you weren't allowed and you didn't have the possibility to become a big criminal because of fucking, there's no trial and there's no innocent till proven guilty. They just fucking take your ass. They throw you in jail. They don't give a fuck. But nowadays, since Serbia, Bosnia, Croatia is a capitalist country, a democratic country, there is a possibility of there being big criminals and being a lot of criminal activities. And since it's such a corrupt country, these criminals have a lot of power and a lot of money. And since politicians are crooks, meaning that they are also criminals, it fucks up society. Of course, there is a 1% in ex-Yugoslavia, in Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia, Montenegro, Macedonia. There is a 1% who lives life like a fucking king. But the rest of the 99%, they're living life way, way worse than what they were living when it was Yugoslavia. Because for a country like that, maybe democracy and maybe capitalism doesn't necessarily work to their best abilities. Because everyone over there is a fucking crook. So maybe you need a system like ex-Yugoslavia, like Yugoslavia, where it keeps the crooks in check, where you cannot be a criminal, and where, in general, everyone lives a better life. Because if I'm being honest, the people in ex-Yugoslavia, in general, aren't the same as, let's say, people in America, people in France, people in Canada, people in England. They're born differently. They're raised differently. So they have a different mentality and they have a different view and a different view of life, a different perception, which is normal. But that is also one thing which is bad from socialism and from communism, is that human beings being human beings, having the mentality, having their ego, having their human nature, communism makes people fucking lazy. That is a fact. Not all people, but in general, all people. Because even though, let's say you're really fucking ambitious, you have all the ambition in the world, you're born in Cuba and there's nothing you can do. You can be as hardworking as you want. You can be as competent as you want, as ambitious as you want. You're still going to make the same money and have the same wealth redistribution as someone who has zero ambition, who has zero work ethic, zero discipline, and just doesn't give a fuck about life. At the end of the day, you guys are going to have the same. Think about it. I consider myself a really nice and kind person. I still would be really fucking pissed if I had to give my all and the other guy doesn't give his all and I get remunerated the same as that guy. I'll be really fucking pissed. So you can't fucking blame them. And that is why, because of human ego, human nature, it can all fucking work. Like I said, let me end it with this last note. there are many things, like I said in the beginning of the episode and throughout the episode, there are many things that communism and socialism brings good, and there's many pros from socialism and communism, from going from physical health, physical fitness, from having no criminals, from keeping criminals in check, and many other aspects, like I spoke throughout the entire episode. There are some pros, but there are way more cons. The cons outweigh the pros. And capitalism, democracy, although it not being perfect, it's far from being perfect. In practice, it's the best system that we ever created, and it's the best system for humans, since human beings are human beings, and they have their own human nature and their human ego. So that was it for this episode. I hope this cleared the mind for many of my friends who are pro-socialist, maybe not pro-communist, but a bit pro-socialist, and many of my university colleagues who found socialism and even communism really attractive. In my opinion, like I said, capitalism, democracy is the best system. That was it for this episode. Peace out.